For 2 years in a row, the US Navy has been trying to retire USS Vicksburg, a Ticonderoga-class cruiser. But the US Congress keeps outlawing the Navy request. Now I know what you're thinking. Why on earth would anyone want to retire such a nice ship? Especially considering that Vicksburg was getting modernized, and by 2022, 85% of the work had been completed. Today, the US Navy is trying to decommission this cruiser yet again. But will the Congress outlaw this for the third time? You see, the United States is entering a period of rising threats from China, which already has the largest navy in the world by the number of hulls. Meanwhile, just as the threat of China is expected to peak, by 2027, the US Navy is projected to hit a multi-year low of just 280 ships.
That's a 105-ship delta. Now, I get it, we can have the capacity debate, but I'm not buying that we can make up for a 105-ship delta, that they can concentrate all in one ocean with short supply lines.
This is 75 ships short of the United States policy of having a 355-ship fleet, a figure that the service doesn't project to hit until 2038 at the earliest, or ever, as portrayed by the alternative to the shipbuilding plan. Now, one would expect that the US Navy would build more ships, and they are, almost double that of what was built 2 decades ago, but still dramatically less than what was built during the 1980s. What's making things worse is that the US Navy has been recently retiring more ships that it's been building. Nothing to worry about though, because having fewer ships is all part of the Navy's plan, and it's not what you think. It all started back in 2015, when the US Navy started a cruiser modernization program with USS Gettysburg that would allow the cruiser's service life to be extended from 35 to 40 years. Within a year, another 6 cruisers joined the program, for a total of 7 ships. The US Navy promised the lawmakers that modernizing these aging ships would keep them in the fleet for years to come, meaning that Ticonderogas would sail into the 2030s. As part of the modernization, the 7 ships were supposed to receive improved combat systems, new sensors and computers, electrical and mechanical systems, as well as completing major work on the aging hulls that were prone to leaks and cracks. 9 years later, the US Navy conceded that things hadn't gone according to plan. Part of the problem was that the modernization program was phased, which meant that the cruisers sat idle for up to 6 years before the deep repair work had begun. In 2016, Vicksburg entered the Navy's cruiser modernization program, so her crew was reduced from 350 to 50. As the ship sat at the pier for 4 years, waiting for its turn in the shipyard, only some minor repair work was done. Finally, Vicksburg entered BAE Shipyard in Norfolk, Virginia in 2020 for an 18-month service life extension program. The ship was scheduled to complete the modernization by March 2021, then June 2022, then March 2023, and then the summer of 2023. According to BAE Systems, as of September 2023, the work on Vicksburg was still ongoing. With these long delays, you'd think someone would be losing sleep at night. Well, not our video editor, because Manta Sleep, who's sponsoring this video, shipped him a bunch of their products to try out. This adjustable sleeping mask perfectly fits his normal size head, and these eye cups are apparently a real game changer. You won't feel any pressure on your eyes, plus they're breathable and 100% blackout. Even if you are a sight sleeper, you'd still be very comfortable. What's really cool is that you can get different types of eye cups and easily swap them out, like these cool eye cups. I mean, they're actually cool. You throw them in the freezer and then put them on at night. Our editor, who's looking at a screen all day long, tried them out and really liked the soothing sensation of the cool cups. Now, some people like to fall asleep while listening to music, meditation, or audiobooks. If that's you, then Manta Sleep Sound Mask with the built-in Bluetooth headphones is just right for you. Getting a good night of sleep is really important for your health, so why not treat yourself to a Manta Sleep mask? Go to mantasleep.com and use the code NWIT to get 10% off your order at checkout and 100% blackout in your sleep. So far, Vicksburg has been in Norfolk for over 7 years and has been awarded more than $500 million for modernization. What's unfortunate is that it's almost certain that she will never be deployed ever again. And that's not my words, but that of the Secretary of the Navy.
In the case of both the Vicksburg and the Cowpens, those ships will never see another deployment regardless of how much money we put into them.
So far, only 2 cruisers, Gettysburg and Chosin, have successfully navigated the cruiser modernization program. It took the cruisers 8 and 7 years, respectively, to return to the fleet. Meanwhile, the work on USS Cape St. George continues. With regards to the other 4 ships, the US Navy deemed them too old and broken down, so the service decided to retire all 4 of them back in 2022. While Congress agreed to retire Hue City and Anzio, it prohibited the service to retire Vicksburg and Cowpens. At the time, according to the BAE shipyard, Vicksburg modernization was 85% complete, with more than $200 million spent on the ship. The Navy hasn't publicly said how much money they've spent on the cruiser modernization program in total. However, Vice Admiral James Kilby publicly stated that the Navy had spent at least $2.4 billion between 2016 and 2021 on modernizing 7 cruisers. Now here comes the kicker. The US Navy wants to retire all Ticonderoga-class cruisers by fiscal 2027. This means that Gettysburg will be retired in 2026, and both Chosin and Cape St. George will be decommissioned in 2027. This means that for the billions of dollars spent, the Navy would only get a handful of extra deployments from those 3 ships in the best-case scenario. No wonder the Congress called this unacceptable and kept prohibiting the retirement of those ships. But how did so much money end up being wasted? Well, there are 2 conflicting views, one from Congress and the other from the Navy. While the Navy wants to do things a certain way, at the end of the day, it's the US Congress that ultimately gets the final say. Lawmakers were concerned about the fact that the Navy has been decommissioning more ships than it plans to build, and accused the service of not efficiently managing taxpayer funds. For example, in fiscal year 2024 budget, the Navy called for building 9 new ships while retiring 11. A year earlier, it wanted to retire 24 ships while only building 8. The same trend is projected for 2025, 2026, and 2027. What also didn't help was that the US Navy was already in a bad spot due to failures of several programs like Zumwalt, the CGX, and of course, the Littoral combat ships, which are now being retired only after a few years of service. Congress was concerned that retiring cruisers meant that the US naval fleet would have a shortfall of VLS cells, which coincides with the heightened risk of a conflict with China in mid to late 2020s. Ticonderoga-class cruisers have a capacity of 122 VLS cells, which is 27% more than the 96 VLS cells on the Arleigh destroyers. The Navy won't recover its VLS cell capacity until the mid-2030s in the best-case scenario. Another frequently cited reason for opposing the decommissioning of cruisers is that repairing old cruisers meant guaranteed jobs in the lawmakers' districts, which is why Congress has been opposing Navy's decision for the past decade. Now that's the backstory on the US Congress side. But what about their views on Vicksburg and the whole cruiser modernization program? Kay Granger, a Republican representative, stated during a subcommittee hearing,
"Some of these ships, especially the littoral combat ships, are among the newest in the fleet. The Navy claims they don't have enough sufficient funding to maintain and operate these ships, but that's not the case. Instead, they've mismanaged billions of dollars in maintenance funding. One glaring example of this is the USS Vicksburg, a cruiser up for decommissioning this year. Since 2020, the Navy has awarded nearly $500 million in contracts to upgrade the cruiser.
According to the U.S. Congress, through fiscal year 2021, the Navy has spent over $3 billion on the cruiser modernization program, with each of the ships receiving in excess of $500 million to complete the modernization. The work completed on those ships ranged from 57% to 93%, and an additional $407 million were required to complete the modernization of these ships to return all 5 to the fleet. The document notes that previous Navy officials have testified that this extended modernization program would result in some of the most capable surface combatants in the Navy, with an extended 40-year service life. So it's understandable why Congress has now twice prohibited the U.S. Navy's plans to retire USS Vicksburg. Not only that, but the Vicksburg fiasco has led Congress to be ever more critical of the service, questioning the Navy's upcoming and more ambitious destroyer modernization program that aims to retrofit older Arleigh Burke-class destroyers with Spy-6 radars. But what does the U.S. Navy have to say about all this? As the modernization work began and shipyards opened the cruisers for the very first time, a variety of unexpected problems were found. Problems with ventilation, cracked fuel tanks, leaks below the waterline, you name it. No wonder the costs per ship ballooned beyond the original $160 million estimate to as much as $500 million. This is why the Navy wanted out of the cruiser modernization program as early as 2018. In their view, upgrading the cruisers in that state was no longer worthwhile. And in the case of Vicksburg, the Navy was skeptical that she would complete its maintenance on time. They had to be real. It made sense to retire the ship. So they tried in 2022, 2023, and again in 2024. As Congress prohibited retiring cruisers, the Navy kept arguing that those modernized ships would not be going on their way to fight because they are not lethal. The Navy argues that the Ticonderoga class, which is a 40-year-old design, as well as the littoral combat ships, would not stand up well in a potential conflict against Russia or China. During simulated warfighting, both classes of ships performed at the bottom of the list. While littoral combat ships lack lethality, the cruisers have an older radar system that cannot detect the newest Chinese threats. Therefore, Ticonderogas would miss their target more often when compared to Flight 3 Arleigh Burke class, equipped with AN Spy-6 radars. So even though the cruisers would bring additional VLS cells to the fight, they're simply not as effective.
With respect to the weapon systems on those platforms, the older spy radars can't see the threat. So if they can't see it, they can't shoot it down.
In the Navy's point of view, Congress cannot look past the number of VLS cells that the cruisers have, and is therefore missing important points with regards to older sensor technologies and aging hulls. Speaking of hulls, Ticonderoga cruisers have been suffering from hull cracks for almost 2 decades. One of the issues is that the cruiser's aluminum superstructure was installed on top of a Spruance-class destroyer hull, which is made of steel. This was done as a cost-cutting measure back in the day, but as it was learned the hard way, aluminum steel joints are prone to cracking, which resulted in much unplanned maintenance throughout the lifespan of the Ticonderoga class. In contrast, the Arleigh Burke destroyers are made entirely from steel, so they don't have this problem. Even cruisers that are currently in active service will have to pull into ports while on deployment to patch holes below the waterline that otherwise would take in water. the cruisers are old. But even if the Navy gets its way and retires the cruisers, what would those hulls be replaced with? According to the Navy, the replacements are already being built. The Arleigh Destroyer Flight 3. This is precisely why the Navy wants to stop throwing good money after bad, and instead put the funds into Arleigh destroyers, both old and new. This strategy is known as divest to invest, and argues that instead of maintaining legacy ships that are not well aligned with future mission priorities, they should be retired. This in turn releases the funds to build new ships and upgrade the ones that make operational sense. For example, by retiring USS Cowpens in 2024 instead of 2026, the Navy would save $130 million.
We're trying to field the most lethal, capable, ready Navy we can based on the budget that we have, rather than a larger Navy that's less capable, less lethal, and less ready.
The U.S. Navy prefers to have a smaller but more lethal fleet.
But I do not know any laws of math that allow you to do addition by subtraction. Here we are today with taking 5 cruisers out of the weapons inventory. And I say weapons inventory because each of them have 120 VLS tubes. So we're talking 600 VLS tubes. There is no replacement between now and 2027, or for that matter, even in the near term beyond.
So who is right here? The Congress or the Navy? Bad decisions had been made, and the U.S. Navy service leaders acknowledged that the cruiser modernization program was disorganized in planning and troubled in execution. But they say they've learned their lesson and are confident that the destroyer modernization program would go smoothly. In addition, the costs get much higher as ships approach their end of life. With budgetary constraints, the harsh reality is that Ticonderogas have to go.
Yes, you have a ship, all right, but that ship spends the overwhelming majority of its time in dry dock, first of all, so you don't have a useful ship. And second of all, you have to spend an enormous amount of money just to keep that ship in dry dock. Yes, you have a ship. If you were to look at your little chart, you'd say, well, we got one more. Is that actually helping us if it can't be in the fight and if you're having to spend a lot of money even while it can't be in the fight?
But the concerns of Congress are also valid. There is a risk of potential Chinese military action against Taiwan in the upcoming years. Retiring legacy ships will result in a shortfall that cannot be filled by Arleigh destroyers in time. Maybe the legacy ships should be maintained to retain whatever usefulness they may have, while at the same time additional funding is provided to build new ships.
We cannot field a fleet larger than one that we can sustain. And at today's fiscal levels, quantity simply cannot substitute for quality, especially as our adversaries are building advanced warfighting systems.
The latest government documents show that Congress is prohibiting the retirement of cruisers USS Cowpens and USS Shiloh. The fate of Vicksburg remains unknown, although records indicate that the Navy plans to retire her and USS Cowpens on June 29th and August 30th, 2024, respectively.